Man, what a day we've had so far.
I know. It's been fun.
I wish every podcast included all sorts of PMF and plasma devices before we, and really great herbs before we start.
Yeah, like really old ginseng.
I feel very primed to have this conversation with you. And it's a long time coming, man. We've been acquaintances for many years, and I don't think we've met in person in quite some time.
I was thinking about that. It must have been 9 or 10 years. I think one of those old biohacking conferences way back in the day.
Yeah.
And staying in touch remotely. But yeah, it's good to be here in person, hanging out.
What a great day. Thank you for bringing your lovely wife and all these incredible tools to work with. It's kind of overwhelming because there's so many things I want to talk about. We have 3 main topics: the herbalism stuff you're into, the PEMF innovation that you just rolled out, which is freaking amazing, and the surprise being the Theraphi plasma situation. So we'll do our best to get through all 3. Before I start, I want to let people know you can find the show notes for this, and trust me, you're going to want to take notes because we're going to cover a lot, and some of it's pretty technical and out there. You'll find the notes at lukestorey.com/Shen, SHEN. I think I did too long on the plasma machine. I can't talk.
A little too relaxed.
And I also want to let people know to go back and check out episode 198 from way back in December 2018 when Mark Langdon, the Blushield founder and co-developer, was on the show. And we talked a lot about some of the technology we're going to cover today. So for people that want, the rewind on that, there was a lot of detail that we might not go into today. But I want to first start out talking about EMF, one of my favorite topics. And I'm always on the lookout for solutions. And I'm pretty sure, other than some of those weird little, probably fake quantum stickers that you put on your phone and shit like that, I was trying all that stuff for years and didn't really notice anything. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Matt Blackburn that told me about the Blushield scalar technology back in the day. I got that one over there, the Cube, which is now Jared has inherited because I've upgraded thanks to you and your team, and was living at the time unknowingly under 2 massive cell towers. And I'd been really sick for 3 years. I had no idea it was from radiation. But I got the Blushield device just because I lived in the middle of the city and just wanted anything that would help with EMF. I just figured there was ambient levels in my house. Installed that thing, meaning plugged it in, that Cube. I think I had it in my bedroom, and then had excruciating headaches and felt like shit for maybe 7-10 days, 2 weeks or something.
I remember all the texts.
You do?
What's going on? I feel like shit.
What's happening? I thought I'm supposed to feel better. And maybe you can explain, what you told me. But what was interesting is that I felt much better after that initial maybe Herx reaction that I was having. Then a couple months later, discovered these cell towers that I didn't know were there. So it was a really cool placebo-proof kind of, N=1 clinical trial, because what I realized in hindsight was, A, it was the cell towers that was making me sick. B, it was impossible to be placeboed. When I put the Blushield in, I started feeling much better. A lot of my symptoms went away. Then after that, I figured out that it was the cell tower. So from that moment on, I was 100% sold on the Blushield technology for EMF. So maybe you can explain in hindsight what was happening and why I felt so immediately shitty, then great afterward.
Yeah, so Blushield, the principal mechanism by which it works is through sympathetic resonance. So it's broadcasting a signal into the environment that sympathetically entrains with your cells over, a 10 to 14 day acclimation period. And what happens when the body doesn't perceive EMF as a threat anymore, it starts to reallocate immune power. So your body is not spinning its wheels trying to attack an imaginary magnetic field or whatever. What it does is it starts to reallocate immune power back to balancing the body essentially. And for some people, if they've been under a lot of stress for a long period of time, that looks like a Herxheimer reaction or a detoxification effect. So a lot of people, we just recommend, take it easy with Blushield. Like most people won't have that level. I mean, you were right next to a cell tower. That was pretty wild to find out afterwards.
Within 100 yards, yeah.
So that you were getting hammered hard.
Yeah.
So the fact
I can only imagine what the levels were. Like I said, I never tested when I was living there because I just didn't want to make myself more paranoid because I'm in the middle of the city. So it was going to be high anyway, right? But I didn't know it was that high. I got legit radiation poisoning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a awesome case study. I mean, you didn't know, like you said, the psychosomatic component was not even in the equation because you didn't even know a cell tower was that close to you. So yeah, what ends up happening is, in a simplified way, the body just reallocates immune power back to the body, and the body knows what to do. It knows how to balance itself out. It knows how to disperse charge throughout the cells and just regulate homeostasis.
Can you explain for people the difference between EMF mitigation? This is something I like to clarify for people in terms of blocking the physics of EMF or harmonizing, the field in the environment like some other devices and technologies and whatnot do, versus what you just described of the sympathetic resonance. So I think that's what's really interesting about Blushield and what sets it apart is it's not claiming, as far as I understand, it's not claiming to like harmonize the waves. It's not claiming to block anything. It's having a direct physiological effect. So maybe you could kind of break down the different mitigating strategies that people are doing.
Right. Yeah, because Blueshield's actually working on the physiology and the hydrogen, water in the system. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll take passive devices, like think pendants, stickers, these kind of things. And what they're attempting to try and do is they're trying to create some type of like tuning fork effect where their body is resonating with whatever sticker, pendant, whatever they're using to try and amplify your biofield. There's a lot of people in the kind of blocking community where they're putting shielding up, trying to live in a Faraday cage, all of that kind of stuff. To me, and what I understand, how I've been trained and what I've learned, I don't even know if that's fully possible because everything is connected, energetically speaking. If you think about what everything's coming from and how it funnels down to hydrogen and then all the other materials that make up the physical world, we're kind of in this soup. And you can block a physical transverse wave, but you can't really block an informational field or a longitudinal pulse perturbation of the ether, essentially. So some companies have come along with what I call non-passive devices, but they're active. So they're powering something. They're either using LEDs, they're using cold lasers, they're using whatever modality to stimulate a response in, let's say, crystals or compositions of substances that resonate its own field, and that creates entrainment, right? So what Blushield does is essentially it's creating an active field, so it's powered. It's creating a live field, but it's dynamic. So it's always changing the amplitude and frequency all the time, so your body doesn't really get used to it. And when you look at things in nature, like everything's always changing. You look at trees, insects, different like light frequencies throughout the day from sunrise to sunset. You'll notice that all the frequencies are changing. And even endogenously within your cells, your cells are multiplying, dividing, taking in nutrients, removing waste. There's all these different frequencies happening all the time. And all of that is changing. So having something that's active is, while good, and you need something that's powered, unless it's dynamic, it's not going to have a long-term effect because your body will tune it out just like any other artificial, repetitious, non-native EMF.
I wish our bodies would tune out 5G, get used to it. I think that's the thing that's so frustrating about the telecommunications industry is, and maybe you'd have some insight into this, it seems to me, and I don't pretend to understand physics or electromagnetics or anything on a level that you would need to make this assertion, but if we have these cell towers everywhere and these Wi-Fi routers and Bluetooth wireless technology, and they're carrying data invisibly through the air using frequencies that are harmful to all living beings on the planet, it seems that there could be frequencies that exist in nature that could be used to carry that information as effectively that wouldn't be harmful to biology. Do you think that's possible?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, we could transmit a Blushield algorithm onto a Wi-Fi router, use a Wi-Fi carrier signal, a radio frequency carrier signal, and put coherent informational fields onto it. So that's the problem. So the frequency in and of itself, frequencies aren't really good or bad. A lot of people get tripped up and like, oh, you need Schumann resonant frequencies, and these frequencies that are kind of lower energy, and high frequencies are bad. But what we found out early on is that any single frequency, as long as it's spontaneous and doesn't last very long, is actually beneficial to the body in a lot of ways. When you start working with carrier signals, these carrier signals have, like you're saying, all this information, like the radio station broadcast or the text or the video or whatever that's transmitting. That signal is really chaotic. It just sounds like complete noise at the cellular level. It's kind of a similar analogy would be if you look at LED lights. LED are quasi point source objects and they flicker, but you can't perceive the flicker when just looking at them, but you take your slow motion camera out, you can see the flicker. Your nervous system, your cells actually pick up on that. Likewise, all the noise that's on these transmissions is what your body picks up on, and it really starts to mount an immune response against. So really what Blueshield's actually doing is it's becoming the dominant signal in the environment. It's like this, you can't really listen to more than one radio station at a time. What you're doing with the radio is you're essentially tuning a coil into a resonant frequency, i.e. the carrier signal. That carrier signal comes into the radio and it has all the information or the code of the song, and it transmits it into longitudinal compressional waves, which we call music, or these sound waves, and your brain interprets it, right? So you're not listening. It doesn't mean all the other radio signals aren't bouncing around. They are. They're being broadcast all the time. You're just tuned in to a specific station with a specific song. So Blueshield's providing like a symphony of frequency and beneficial to where the body is able to entrain with that, just like you would do with nature. I mean, preferably we'd like to drop people in the middle of a national forest and they'd be just great, right? That's how we have evolved. So we have to make our technology work in harmony with nature, with natural laws, natural principles, and natural kind of rhythms, so to speak, of like Fibonacci and phi ratio. And I think Blueshield, from what I found, and I came into this technology about 2017, is the best thing that I saw that could actually be dynamic enough to where your body won't become numb to it and tune it out over time, you know?
Yeah. I've also heard you talk about your skepticism. That's the word I'm looking for. Didn't take enough paracetam, apparently, around doing blocking and shielding and making a Faraday. So I think, I have a little bit of micro PTSD after being so ravaged by the cell towers back in the day. So when we bought this house, I went full on and Faraday caged the bedrooms, and under this whole room, all the electric fields are all blocked. There's like a shielding material underneath the wood floors that's all grounded. Behind every couch, I mean, it's like as un-EMF of a house as you can possibly get, and the Ethernet everywhere. But I've thought about, sleeping in a totally shielded room, which Faraday, for those listening, means that all, ceiling, floor, and all of the walls are all blocked. So when we had not shielded the bedroom, you'd go in there and you'd pick up not a lot, because we're kind of in the country, but a significant enough level of RF that I was like, nah, I'm just going to block it. And there was such a sense of satisfaction when it was done to go in the room, and the doors and all the glass windows have an RF film. I mean, it's as well as you could possibly do it. Everything's totally grounded. And there's such a sense of satisfaction to go in there, shut the doors, shut the curtains, and take your RF meter, and it's in the green and there's no beeps. It's just silence. But I have thought about the cosmic energy and the scalar waves in nature, right, to which we have evolved. We haven't evolved to be next to a cell tower and have all these kind of artificial non-native EMF, but we have evolved and are resonant with native EMF, right? The planet's magnetic, you have the electric field and plasma up above. I mean, the whole planet is basically a battery, right? So I've thought about like, man, am I missing out on those? Yet, you still get a little signal in my room, even when everything's blocked as well as it could possibly be, right? It's not 100% frequency free. So my thought was, yeah, maybe, I'm blocking out the gross frequencies, not gross like disgusting, but just those big, bulky, chaotic ones. But my hope is that because it's still penetrable to some degree, that I'm still getting exposed to the positive cosmic sort of radiation that would be beneficial to health. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, are you just anti-Faraday 100%, or do you think some of the good stuff still leaking through?
Oh, I'm not anti-Faraday. I think whatever brings people peace of mind is good. And of course, all that is producing massive amounts of scalar waves. So I think inherently we're still getting some of that. I don't think you could fully block out nature. I mean, we live in a plasma cocoon. So, I mean, the thing that I look at from like, okay, to every hammer, everything's a nail, right? So like if we look at full spectrum kind of understanding of how we interface with biology, consciousness, and the elements of nature, you wouldn't really want to eat a completely sterilized diet. You wouldn't really want to drink completely sterilized water. And people talk about like Candida, for example, this opportunistic yeast, Candida albicans, and they try and get rid of it in their body. But if you realize if you got rid of 100% of Candida albicans, you wouldn't really be healthy actually at all, because it's opportunistic in the sense that it actually helps you in certain situations, but then it becomes opportunistic when it has the ability to override your immune system and take a foothold and all that kind of stuff. So living in a completely sterile environment energetically, I don't think it's 100% necessary. I don't think it's bad. I haven't seen any research, or maybe you would have more insight on it because you've actually like stayed in a Faraday cage for lengths of time. What I do know is that there's always like a scalar component of every transverse electromagnetic wave, and it's always moving out of phase or 90 degrees to that transverse component. So if I don't really have a stretchy shirt on, but if I did, I would like use this as an analogy of like, we create a transmission or a signal, and what happens when that signal expands, you get a compression or refraction 90 degrees to the opposite of that. So we can remove these transverse waves and create standing or scalar waves and use that to imprint code or information on with microprocessing technology and create sympathetic resonance. So if you're somebody who doesn't have like a Blushield, for example, you could put plants in really good soil with good bacteria in the soil. All of those are, and essentially, if you think about it, it's frequency, it's energy, it's vibration. So it's putting something into the room, even if you're in a Faraday cage. So there's natural ways to bring energy, vibration into the room. And that's what I think a lot of people are kind of stuck on and confused about when we talk about like one of the best known quotes of Tesla. I mean, it's in every documentary you hear about Tesla. And he said that if you want to unlock the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Energy obviously is energy, energetic fields. Frequency is cycles per second, like that's related to a time axis. And then you think of vibration. What is that actually? What that is a disturbance or a perturbation of the ether. So a lot of these old school guys like Oliver Heaviside, Tesla, Faraday, Charles Proteus Steinmetz, some of the greats like the legends in electrical field theory that, by the way, built 100% of our electrical grid. Like Einstein didn't contribute anything to that. A lot of these particle physics guys didn't contribute to the electrical grid. These guys understood the ether, and that how the disturbance in the ether is what modulates or adapts to or creates a hormetic response to any kind of stimulation. So going back and kind of circling back to what you're saying with like communications, yeah, you could use lasers, coherent point source light. We could create technology that's actually quite a bit safer and coherent and actually even beneficial, in my opinion, from what I understand of like the physics of it, that we wouldn't really need to live in a Faraday cage either. So again, not saying it's bad or anything. I'm just saying it's sort of unnecessary if you can lock in all these different phases and components of health, lifestyle, nutrition, and EMF protection.
Yeah, and there's also like you said, if it makes you feel better, there's a relaxation of the nervous system when you believe deeply that you are protected, right?
Exactly, and that's important. That's
but yeah, it's something I've kind of. I mean, I'm not going to change it now. I'm happy with it, but it's something I've just kind of contemplated. Right? What my goal is to create inside my house as biocompatible as environment as is possible. So I'm trying to mimic outdoors. But nowhere outdoors on the planet would you be sleeping in a Faraday cage.
Right.
Right. So it's like, well, if you're in the middle of the forest, there's that one town somewhere in Virginia or something where there's no RF because they're looking at the stars or whatever they're doing. I don't know if you've heard of that, but there's one place on the planet at least where there's no radar, there's no radio signals or anything, right? Because they're doing some kind of experiment. And I thought, well, maybe my bedroom is close to that, but it's still mimicry, right? It's still kind of trying to simulate what would have been 300 years ago before we had electricity as ubiquitous as it is now.
And as we were sharing with each other prior to the show with our elaborate water systems for our house, it's kind of silly to think that we're going to mimic what a spring can actually do with the whole entire hydrological cycle in our little house in these little, like this 6-foot bandwidth of like space, It's like, it's kind of silly to think that you can actually do it. You can do a lot, of course, and it's really great. And we want to try and make the best water possible to shower in and everything else. But it's pretty analogous. I mean, it's hard to replicate nature without just being in nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. That reminds me, our mutual friend, Matt Blackburn, his place in Idaho, he's on a spring. And I texted him one day, I'm like, oh, you're so lucky to be on a spring. What's the TDS of the water, the total dissolved solids? It's like there's springs in Texas, but the water's super shitty because it's really high,
really hard
in calcium from all the limestone and stuff. And he's like, oh, it's like 30. I'm like, dude, why are you running all your water through these elaborate filtration systems? You have the most killer water. And, he has his own reasons for doing that. But I'm like, I'd give anything to be on a property with 30 ppm. It's probably primary water too, that's not even been on the surface of the earth to be contaminated before,
right.
If he's at high enough altitude, perhaps. And here's you and I you have the Ophora system, or a different version of it like I have. And it's like the amount of money and time that goes into basically just trying to mimic spring water.
I know.
And to your point, no matter how much you spend, you're never going to get it as good as it is coming right out of the ground.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then you add the deuterium factor in too, like this
heavy hydrogen.
Yeah, this water here is through all the filtration, and that's not going to help the deuterium. It's probably still like 155 parts per million. But I tested the deuterium on water from springs in Big Bear that was around 8,000 feet, and it was like 135. So it's interesting too. Like you can't even get to that when you're in the filtration system, no matter how great it is. You're never going to get the deuterium out. You have to go to a high altitude kind of granite mountain to get low deuterium water, or to a glacier or something.
Right. Well, I am working on a mineral additive. Right now, the only way to really get deuterium levels down is through evaporation techniques, which is really time consuming. But I'm working with some mineral substrates that seem to be doing the trick. We're still needing to send it into the labs. This is totally premature. I probably shouldn't even talk about it, but I am working on,
we
on
won't
that
hold
one.
you to it.
Yeah, I am working on that one, and it's been a challenge, but it's about a year into it. Working
cool.
on a mineral ratio that would be appropriate to kind of, because it's heavy hydrogen and everything's like a harmonic of hydrogen. If you think about what people call the quantum space is just a field convergence that distills into light and then into hydrogen. Kind of like if you look at the hormone cascade with pregnenolone and all the hormones that metabolizes into. It's a similar process with substances. So if you kind of know how to work the chemistry of it, you can probably, and this is my speculation, you could probably remove it with mineral saturation. And that's what I'm working on recently.
Wow. So. You're prolific, dude. I mean, you got your Shen blossom thing, and we're going to talk about that, which is like such a beautiful suite of products and food products and herbs and things like that. And I always, and then you got your Blushield thing going on as you're the U.S. distributor. Is that your official title?
Yeah, and Shen Blossom was actually the first company I founded in 2012 before Blushield came along. I just saw, obviously, we want to be as full spectrum health as possible, and like nobody at the time was satisfactory in like approaching the EMF thing, because EMF is just more pervasive all the time. And I was just trying to figure out like what's actually going to work to protect. And I had a young family. I had a toddler at the time, and just trying to figure out what would actually work. That was super important to me. When I found something that I thought actually worked, I was like, how can I help? Talking to Mark Langdon, who's the founder, and we hit it off. And we started importing them and like bringing awareness, talking to you, getting everybody we knew kind of in the fold on like, hey, there's an option that's actually viable. And we actually have that clinical trial that's going to be dropping this fall. That's really kind of the most extensive research that's ever been done on EMF protection devices, that whole category, because it's an independent review board certified paper. You can look it up on clinicaltrials.gov, and it's been 2 years in the making. So it's been a long, lengthy process, and it's about to drop this fall, which we're really excited about because we've seen a lot of beneficial results in the preliminary data. We're still waiting on a couple labs to write the paper. But the heart rate variability, blood glucose dropped 8% in healthy people. And by the way, these people are doctors. We were approached by doctors to test this out because they were getting such good results with their patients. They're like, you guys have a tiger by its tail. We need to like actually get some data, because like your story, we would hear that over and over and over. And obviously we'd be getting more indoctrinated just by hearing people's testimonials. So we're like, we need data, we need research, we need some like hardcore empirical stuff, because this just sounds too good to be true from what we're seeing. And having a less than 1% return rate, just as a business owner, by itself is crazy. Like with any industry, any product. I mean, Shen Blossom is there, but just in general, from my experience, like doing source and supply and product development and supply chain management through, my career or whatever, that was kind of like eye-opening. Like, wow, this is a subtle energy device, right? And people are not returning it. Like
that's crazy too, because the Blushield technology is, there's no bells and whistles. It's not, you can't see it or feel it do anything, right? It's like you plug it in, you're like, is this thing doing anything? I don't know. So it would be the type of product that would be prone to a higher rate of returns just because someone plugs it in and they're like, it's not flashing or anything, It just kind of sits there.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's what I thought was really, really strange about it. And, further we get down the rabbit hole, we're kind of understanding more and more why. And we were grateful that we were approached by this network of doctors. Deep sleep, REM, there's neurotransmitter stuff going on. Like the mechanism of action is really interesting and strange with EMF, because if it's affecting the voltage gated calcium channels in the brain, it's going to be affecting a lot of like chemistry, like a ton of chemistry. And we're electromagnetic before we're physiochemical. We work on the physiochemical level with herbs and a lot of the herbs and nutrition, these are substances or tools, if you think of them that way, that you digest that signal the body to do different things, right? So you need proper voltage. You need and that's why we created a PEMF device. Because when I was trying to simplify everything in physics, physiology, anatomy, and I'm trying to find these common grounds because it gets pretty complex. There's a lot of theory, and of course, from different industries, you can't really trust the experts or trust the science because a lot of them don't agree on a lot of the big topics. I
know, it's maddening.
And whoever controls the narrative on a mainstream level, they're all sniffing each other's behinds, agreeing, yeah, your stuff smells like mine. So they all agree and create a cohort which goes out and pontificates certain information, right? But it might not actually be true in some regards. So I'm trying to figure out okay, I can take a computer apart. I can figure out how the hard drive interfaces with the motherboard. I can figure out what a bus is. I can figure out this stuff. But what is the actual electricity that's making this whole thing work? What's magnetism? What is a magnet? I had to really kind of deep dive in all this stuff. And then, I met people like Paul Harris, who's the inventor of the Theraphi, and really starting to get a more concrete understanding and getting the old documents, getting the old books and interviews of Tesla and Oliver Heaviside, all those classics of field theory and the guys that built the electrical grid and what they understood about magnets and dielectricity. Nobody talks about dielectricity. You talk to any electrical engineer, building biologist, it's one of those topics that gets kind of glazed over, and some might know about it and a lot of people surprisingly don't. But the conjugate field of a magnet is very interesting to me. And I was thinking, okay, what does this mean? What's the principle here? Magnetism. How do we get more magnetic energy into the body? Because everything that you eat, consume, drink, whatever will work a lot better. And in fact, I think strengthening your biofield with magnetism actually helps prevent against electromagnetic radiation atrophy and stress, because your biofield is just so strong. You can move in and out of energy fields more fluently and easily and gracefully, and your body doesn't kick into the need to try and fight it as much because it has surplus energy. It's okay, I can just chill. I don't have to worry about this because I don't have to really fight anything, even though you don't have anything sympathetically resonating with you because you have such a charge that you're carrying in the first place. You know what I mean? That
makes perfect sense. I've observed this in real time throughout my life as I became, 20 years ago, became aware of EMF. And some people don't seem to be bothered by it at all. I mean, I still think it's not good for anyone, but I am definitely more on the sensitive side than most people I know. Unfortunately, it really sucks. It's kind of my Achilles heel. That's same we were talking about flying, flying just wrecks me. And I fly with people, my wife, other people, they're fine. They get off the plane, they're ready to go to dinner, hang out. I'm like, what? I can barely walk, I'm smoked. And that's with all of the interventions that I apply to something like flying or even just EMF protection. I do so many crazy things to avoid EMF. But that makes sense. The biofield thing and just the resilience. Every body is uniquely resilient. And also every body is constantly changing. And the resilience of my body and your body are changing by a microsecond, right? It's all of the signaling that's going on and all of the changes of energy. So that makes a lot of sense. As far as the Blushield goes, there's so much stuff. My brain's rattled because there's so many things I want to cover.
Which most people don't feel Blushield. You say people don't feel Blushield, but most people, they don't feel the effects of sitting in front of a computer all day or a cell phone in their pocket or any of these things. Right. So it's kind of interesting, the level of sensitivity there.
Oh, dude, if I am like scrolling on my phone, how I know I'm doing it too long is my hands start to hurt. Like it aches in the joints of my hands from just touching that radiation for a few minutes. It's like crazy. But as far as the Blushield goes, I want to run a couple practical things by you. So the first device that I got was the Cube. And then I got this old school, for those watching on video, I got the old school pocket version, the portable.
Retro.
Yeah, this is the retro 70s one. And I, anytime on a plane, driving, I take this thing everywhere. And then I upgraded to the more powerful portable one here, the pocket one, that's pretty much more substantial and heavier. So I felt like the Cube did the trick as I described earlier. So you guys make an auto version, right, that has like an adapter for a car lighter. So I have that one in my car, of course, because new cars are crazy with the EMF. And people ask me the questions on Instagram and stuff like, what do you think of Teslas? Because my wife has a Tesla versus other cars. I've tested Teslas and my car, which is a gasoline car, and they're really the same. When you have Wi-Fi turned and Bluetooth turned on in your car and the magnetic field coming from the engine compartment, like I really don't think it makes a difference what kind of car you have.
They're all computerized.
Yeah. I mean, you have chips in there, right? So my advice is like get a 1950s Ford truck or something if you don't want EMF. So I have that Blushield in there. And then this one, is this the Ultra?
That is the premium Ultra. Yeah,
that's premium Ultra.
That's being currently rebranded to the U2.
Okay.
So we have the U1 and the U2. That's actually the model, the dual band model that's used in the clinical trial.
Oh, cool. Okay. So this is the badass shit right here. So I have the car one and this in my car. My question, the long way around to get to this question, am I going overkill and by having two of them in my car?
So yeah, the overkill factor, I don't know if you've been able to tell, I'm kind of an extreme dude. I will put one of those in my car. The auto we came out with, I originally talked to Mark about that because he didn't have one at the time. It was the plug-in and the Cube and the portable is kind of the lineup. And I was like, hey, I don't like flying. I'd rather drive if I can. And usually I'm carrying tech around anyway that's sensitive. So, hey, can you make one for the car? And he ended up making a prototype. I liked it. And then we ended up bringing it to market. And that is the strength of the old plug-in. So you're getting a lot more. It's overkill in the sense that you don't need that coverage area, obviously, but the strength of the signal is a lot more powerful. And to me, with Blushield, because it's like pure crystal photonic scalar, meaning it's pure informational fields, longitudinal waves, it's not a problem for me. And there are people that are sensitive. The surprising thing that I found out is that there are people like where the entry-level model, the less powerful stuff really does work for them. And, there's people still in rural environments. They might have a couple cell towers here and there, or they're electromagnetically hypersensitive and it's almost too much. And some people don't like detox. Obviously, that's kind of you don't want to feel like you're gaslighting people when you're like, if you remember when you were texting me about your situation, you're like, man, I feel like crap. It's like, no, it's all in your head. Yeah, it's like, you don't want to like gaslight people, but you got to explain the Herxheimer reaction, what's actually happening at the cellular level and the detoxification pathways and stuff like this. And then, okay, people are happy with that. But sometimes when people get too strong of a model for their needs, what we do is we just recommend taking it, like plug it in for a couple hours a day and then unplug it, and 3 hours a day the next day, and like get your body used to it. That's a little bit more of a gentle way to introduce the Blushield field into your environment. But having it in your car, I mean, we traveled with that Evo down here, and that's the most powerful stuff on the market right now.
All right, cool. Next question is, since this is in my car, this is always the one that I bring on flights. And if I have a seat with an outlet, I plug this guy in on the airplane, and then of course in my hotel room and Airbnb and stuff. So like this is like my security blanket. This one right here for travel. I think it's kind of doing the other passengers on the plane a service, especially on a Wi-Fi plane. So this guy, if I have this under my seat on an airplane, this is like pretty much blasting the whole length of the plane with scalar waves, right?
Yep, absolutely. And what's that's the interesting thing that I had to think about early on. I was like, okay, putting these in, health spas and things of that nature, the real entrainment happens over a period of time. That's what the original, small scale, it was grassroots research back in New Zealand, testing on animals, doing live field microscopy, dark field microscopy. I mean, what you would find is that there's an acclimation period, like we mentioned earlier, as 10 to 14 days. And that's when the cells really start to kind of create that maximized sympathetic resonance entrainment. So I'm under the impression that it seems to, when people come into my house just temporarily, or if they're at a work environment, they're there for 8 hours a day, but they're not necessarily sleeping with Blushield, it seems to have an effect as it sweeps over the cells. And, scalar energy is going to affect naturally the water in the body and the hydrogen. These longitudinal waves kind of don't have a time component. It's kind of instant. So to kind of clarify for people, I don't really have a stick. So analogy, like if you're looking at a transverse electromagnetic wave, it's like you're going for a hike, right? And you're trying to go from point A to point B. And a transverse wave is going to take the long way around. It's like swerving back and forth to get to that point. But a compressional or longitudinal wave will actually be a direct thing. So if I have a stick in the middle of my hands and oscillate it, that's an oscillation. That's a transverse electromagnetic oscillation. If you're talking about scalar compressional wave, it's instant. So as soon as I put energy input on this side, it's instantaneously hitting the other side. So there's no time component. So when people call a scalar wave, it's kind of a misnomer. There's no way, like the wave particle duality thing doesn't apply to this kind of level of physics, right? That's for particle physicists and mathematicians and stuff that don't really test things against things in nature. The scalar wave is actually imprinting the frequencies that are encoded when the collapsed field happens due to the microprocessor. And that's going to sweep over the cells and have like I think a temporary effect too. But when we talk about that, I just wanted to clarify that because some people are like, well, you said the entrainment takes this long. Well, you're actually getting kind of an instantaneous effect like you would on a plane. But I just wanted to like elaborate a little bit more on like what's actually going on with the scalar waves affecting the cellular biology and the water in the body. Most people won't be around it on a flight enough to get like a headache or a Herxheimer reaction. Yeah. They might feel a little bit more relaxed or depending on their level of sensitivity.
That's been my hope. I believe in consent, right? So it has crossed my mind like, well, these people next to me didn't ask to be exposed to these Blushield scalar fields. But I just figured, I'm not going to ask permission because it's only going to help everyone on the plane. So.
Wouldn't that be nice about consent with cell towers?
Yeah, no shit, right? That's a good point. You guys didn't ask me if I wanted the Wi-Fi on the plane turned on, which I usually don't. Next question then. Okay, so we got the car, airplane. Say, I guess probably exceedingly few people have gone to the lengths I have of shielding their bedrooms and created Faraday cage. If I have one of these bad boys plugged in the house, I'm assuming the scalar waves, as we're calling them from the Blushield technology, would be able to penetrate that shielding anyway, and I would still get the benefit of the resonance, even though my room is shielded from RF, because this is different and I guess kind of smaller than RF.
Yeah.
And just would go right through the wall, right? That it's not going to stop anything.
Yeah, if you think about what you're talking about with RF is just a very small bandwidth of the electromagnetic spectrum, but that's still the electromagnetic spectrum. It's encompassed in this point source potential, this dielectric, so to speak. So yeah, having it that will and you can't remove electrostatics from a Faraday cage. You can still get transmissions in and out of a Faraday cage. It's not, people think Faraday cage is this like bulletproof, like 100% hardcore thing that there's just no penetrating, but that's just been proven over and over that that's not the case. So again, I don't know how viable shielding actually is, especially when you can't remove electrostatic charge. Like you're holding electrostatic charge in a Faraday cage, and you're transmitting scalar. And if you look at about all these out of phase signals in the body, like if you do your Qigong meditation, you breathe, energy's going down, Kundalini's going up, the cycle. So there's all these circuits that are happening. Your heart is a scalar pump. I mean, you can't really remove the longitudinal aspect of a transverse electromagnetic. You just can't. So you're still getting exposed to like the informational fields. But what I always questioned about Faraday cages in general is like, well, I've never seen any research or data or experimented with myself on living in a Faraday cage to where like, are you blocking out beneficial things? And I think it's the same kind of moot point. You can't really block nature. If you're a particle physics guy, if you're an atomist, a materialist, thinking like everything's imaginary bumping particles and there's these like volleyballs and marbles running down wires and whatever, like this subatomic space between atoms is kind of what we're talking about, this realm. The instantaneous, non-time, non-local, spooky action at a distance effect is happening all the time with all these things around us in nature, right? So we're just collapsing a wave and we're just like we're making it more available and creating a pulse, which is a perturbation and agitation of the ether, which has a hormetic response and adapts and responds accordingly. We're so much a fish in water that we ask, like, you ask a fish what water is, like, it doesn't even know. It's just been swimming in it. Like the ether is all around it. And come to find out, funny enough, general relativity ended up making up dark matter because it couldn't make the equations work with quantum physics, right? And what does dark matter have? Oh, it's not measurable. It's everywhere. We can't like quantify it in any way. It sounds like ether, right? So it's just a euphemism for the ether. And these guys back in the day, in the early 1900s, they knew about this kind of stuff, and they're building technology in our current electrical grid on all of this. They weren't living in Faraday cages. They were using electromagnetic discharges to vitalize their body. And that's what we're doing with magnetism, with the arc, plasma fields, so on and so forth. So, and Blushield and scalar waves.
Have you heard of that study? And I've referenced this so much, and I wish I had more information. I forget if it was in Germany or Russia, somewhere over in that general vicinity, wherein they did an experiment where they had people living underground. Did you hear about that? And so basically it built like these an underground facility, and had people, move in and sleep there. And everyone got really sick in like a month and had to move out.
Was it mold, air?
No, it's from being cut off from the ether. We're
and not, sun and everything else.
Yeah, we're not designed. I wish I could provide a link or something. It's one of those things I read about, and it just stuck in my awareness that, we're supposed to be on the surface of the earth, basically.
Did they rule out geopathic stress or underground rivers or any of that kind of stuff? Or?
I don't know. It just stuck in my mind as like, we tried to get people to live underground, because you hear like these theories of, under Mount Shasta, there's like civilizations of ETs and stuff.
Or those ancient caves in Turkey and all those places.
That's the thing. There is historical relevance to people seemingly having successfully lived underground, right? And in these ancient sites and stuff. Yeah, but that was a modern day experiment, and they got horribly ill and had to abort the mission.
Which is interesting, because you'd think that you would have some like earth resonant frequency application to the body, like what we do with the MISA, like with, with the ginseng that we produce. It's produced in the old world traditional way, where you, have a beeswax lined vessel, and you're basically doing a microfermentation in the earth, right?
Oh,
so
cool.
You're actually doing these processes of microfermentation, and it seems like there would be some actual benefit to being kind of underground, temporarily speaking. But that's interesting to find out that they were all getting sick. If anyone
listening knows that experiment and can send it to me, please do, because I've referred to it a few times, and I could probably look it up online. Experiment where people lived underground and got sick. It's probably findable.
Yeah.
I mentioned it to people like you, and I'm always hoping they're like, oh yeah, I know all the details on that. So I don't have to remember it. All right, what's this thing right here for those watching the video? It's called the Evo, and I saw this Blushield device online, and I had no idea it was this big. I thought it was probably the same size as my old cube, but this thing is very substantial. I mean, it's
massive.
Heavy. Like the cube originally was very light, and when I first got it, I was like, what's this thing going to do? It weighs like an ounce, and then obviously I was proven wrong because it worked. But what's the deal with this guy right here?
It's what's inside that counts. The Evo is the evolution of the Blushield technology. It's a completely new circuit. So to kind of break it down for those people that know Blushield or don't know Blushield, the original algorithm was basically pulsing multiple pulses every half minute. So for 3 or 4 seconds, it would be pulsing on, and then it'd be completely off. So it'd sweep the body, it'd give the body a rest. The body really loves the break from the signals. All the scalar pulses with the informational code on them would only last a few seconds, which is really good for biology. You don't want something constant. That's the problem with EMF, is that it's hammering people constantly. The next generation was a dual band scalar. So it had a single output, phi ratio output, and then it was interrupted with the original Blushield algorithm. So it had the same tech as the old stuff, but Mark was like, 5G is just fast and everywhere. It's millimeter waves. We need something that's actually going to kind of compete with that versus just the 30 seconds on off thing. And so that was the dual band. That's kind of our current lineup. Now the Evo doesn't make any of that obsolete. The Evo is a completely new circuit where it's on all the time, but it has all these out of phase signals and this really complex layer of code that is more in, it's not millions of frequencies within the human responsive range. It's just kind of like low mid to low mid high range. So it's still a diverse bandwidth for the body, because the body likes variety. But it's very much has a higher degree of specificity towards phi ratio and phi ratio mathematics. So what we found with this one in particular, not only being like stronger output as far as signal, 180 meters in all directions from the center of the device.
So one of these in a house this size is like more than enough.
More than enough.
You just put it somewhere kind of in the center of the house, and the whole house is getting the field.
Yep. Concrete only has a 5% dampening effect on, because of the water concentration in it, has a dampening effect on scalar, but everything else, it'll just go right through instantaneously. So, and a lot of people where they live, they're a good neighbor to have. You know,
I know.
They don't even know the benefits that they're giving their
I think
neighbor.
about that sometimes, like we're probably having a pretty positive impact on our 3 surrounding neighbors with all the different energetic things I have going on. I may have like organite shit buried in the yard and like all kinds of stuff. A lot of it, I don't even know if it works. I'm just like, throw everything in the kitchen sink at it when it comes to EMF and chemtrails and God knows what else we're dealing with. Probably
There's
things that we're not even aware of that we're being assaulted by. So for someone who wants to check out Blushield, there's also this wearable one.
And
this
I also
watch.
misspoke on the Evo. I forgot that it's on all the time, but then it has 5 seconds or a few seconds off.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of full circle back to the other one. It was like mostly off and then a little bit on. This is the other way around. So this is mostly on and then it gives a complete signal break. Whereas the dual band, it's interrupted. The break is the original Blushield algorithm with the constant signal. So this is the evolution of that technology. I just want to clarify that.
All right, cool. So I forgot to mention this one here, which is the watch, which is super cool because I'm like shocked that I didn't lose one of the portables, the little pocket ones, which is why I put my phone number on the back of mine because I was always paranoid. I never lost it somehow, like because it was important to me. But then when the watch came out, I liked this because I didn't have to worry about it falling out of my pocket and I could, wear it working out or doing whatever. Is this watch version still around?
Yeah, we still have that one.
Okay.
And what's nice, it's got the red LEDs on the back too that are out of phase. So you got that photobiomodulation aspect to it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of simplify, before we move on from the EMF and the Blushield stuff, I want to simplify for people that are like, oh, this sounds cool. I want to check it out. And if you have a 1% return rate, sounds like most people find that it's useful. It's going to be dependent on people's budgets, of course. So maybe one of the portables is, a good entry point for someone in terms of how much money they have to spend. But what about like if you live, which would you recommend, for example, if you live in the middle of a city in a small apartment versus a big house in the country and so on? Like what's kind of the breakdown in terms of the wisest application for people depending on their specific situation?
That's a good question. So there's basically 2 inherent models, like you're saying. There's the home units that you plug in, they're stationary, they run on the mains power, and then you have the portable devices. So we always say that if you are on a budget and you can only pick one or the other, always go with the home unit. That's where you're going to be sleeping and spending most of your time. You can take it to work with you. That's going to be the strongest and best sympathetic resonance. These aren't powerful. These are just powered by lithium ion batteries. You have a 500 milliamp battery in there, 1,000 milliamp battery, depending on the model. And Mark would say one thing, the inventor, he'd say like, don't trust that as your primary resonance. I've had customers buy those and they swear by it. Like their kid went to college and he sleeps with it under the pillow and just does just fine. I think personally, like the sympathetic entrainment is going to happen faster with a home plug-in or a plug-in model. So within that spectrum, if you're living in metropolitan city, high EMF, we have a great resources on our website where you can go and basically do antennasearch.com, and that gives us a relative gauge of like how many cell towers and antennas are in a 2-mile radius. So I
love that site.
Yeah.
We'll put that in the show notes, you guys, antennasearch.com. And again, the show notes are lukestorey.com/Shen. Carry on.
Yeah, so you would go there and kind of figure out what level you would need, and we have all the resources to figure out like within 200 antennas, it's this model. So major metropolitan area, of course, it's budget related, but usually you want to go with the strongest you can get, a C1 or an Evo. Those are kind of like the top tier models. If you're in a more rural area and don't have as much radiation, the plug-in works really well. And then the plug-in is kind of the most entry level product. So you'd want the least amount of radiation in your environment. And the Phi 3 is kind of our strongest of the entry-level series. And that's just an ABS plastic case versus a beryllium aircraft-grade alloy material. So yeah, whatever your budget accounts for, you can always future-proof yourself, because what's nice about this technology is that it works on your biology. So it doesn't matter what generation or what bandwidth. I mean, there's not much bandwidth left to go before we get into ionizing radiation, which they'll probably won't make legal. But, so there's...
I was wondering about that. Like 5G is already using whatever up to 80 gigahertz or some shit. I'm like, what's 6 and 7G going to be?
Yeah.
It's like you said, pretty soon you're just going to have like basically an X-ray machine down the street or something. It's just crazy.
It's wild. It's unbelievable. And again, especially knowing that we can make the technology safer. Telecoms, they have their way they go about things, and they why reinvent the wheel?
I love going to quote unquote third world countries where they're still on like LTE and 3G. I see like a shitty cell tower. I'm like, yes, my phone barely works. This is amazing.
I know. They're T9ing.
Yeah. It's just, I'm just dismayed at the short-sighted nature of human beings and their advancements in technology. I'm sure you've read The Invisible Rainbow.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, like, just looking at the advent of the 60 hertz electric grid, and then the advent of AM radio and FM radio, and then radar. It's like you can see all these correlations between widespread illness that is often attributed to things like crazy viruses and things when it's not. But there's a correlation which with each level of stupidity of humankind and our technology and our thirst for like convenience, and of course the profit associated with offering that convenience to people.
Right.
It's just wild. I'm sure in a number of years we're going to look back on where we are now with the telecommunications and just go like, oh God, like we look back on asbestos and DDT and other things now, or lead paint and whatever. And we look back and think, how could we have been so dumb? We are in that right now.
It's
on
true.
A much bigger scale.
And as long as, there's no regulation, they have no need to make, similar to, 1986 and vaccines and all that kind of stuff. It's like, if there's no liability, like why the hell do you have to do safety testing? You really don't.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, I was doing an adjustment in the settings on my iPhone today, and I came across the radiation exposure guidelines kind of thing. But just, and you click on it, it's like, we've determined that this is totally safe. Here's the data. I'm like, really? That's so funny. Yeah, in the iPhone, somewhere in the settings there, it gives you the information about the radiation levels and assures you that it's safe. I'm like, okay, put it under your pillow every night for a month and let me tell you how that brain cancer is going.
Yeah, it's wild. Like I'm working with the PhD on the paper, you learn a lot, like, because he's like on the guy that's writing our technical paper that's going to be submitted to PubMed indexed medical journal for Blushield. He knows... He's kind of on our wave, like he knows kind of what's going on. It's just amazing to see like what they'll do, like how many studies they'll actually do until they get what they want to appear in the study. It's pretty wild.
Right. Like looking
it
at
does happen.
How they did the sleight of hand where they talked about cell phones being safe to put up to your head, and they're measuring the temperature. It's like, oh, the phones don't get hot. They're trying to pretend like it's the heat of the cell phone that's going to damage
Thermal
your
effect,
brain. It's just like, oh God. But thankfully there's people like you and podcasts like me to share this information. And I always, and I know you share this perspective too, because you're into energetics and emotional healing and all the things you're into, but it always is a balance of educating oneself, building more awareness around some of the things in our environment like EMF that are deleterious to our health and well-being, but also being paranoid about it and worrying about it is also really bad for you.
It's a stressor.
Yeah. So it's like, it's a double whammy. So I'm always kind of dancing on that razor's edge of like, okay, cool. I know this is going on now. How can I not worry about it? And
knowledge is a tool, right? Like you want to use tools to be constructive versus destructive. So knowledge can actually be very beneficial. Like, for instance, if you're afraid of like violent crime, like you study self-defense. That helps, right? Like you have to kind of be aware of the problem, but unless you do something about it and train like how to do something about it, then you can really kind of supersede the negative aspect of the stress, because life is stressful, right? Like there's all these things that could like impose stress on us, including self-imposed stress with mind and emotions and all this kind of stuff. So that's why I think, being as well-rounded as you can and studying like martial arts with healing arts, that's always been studied as a harmonious balance, So it gives a certain kind of confidence. And I think what you do and the information you provide to people gives that confidence so they can like live well-informed and strategically with their life so they can actually step out of the fear. Because all this scary, weird, geopolitical, whatever that's happening, our minds can override that. Just like the mind can override poor diet. The consciousness is the most powerful tool you have. And most people don't want to train Qigong or train the martial mental side of things, but it's very useful for people that are willing to put in the work.
When I interviewed Bruce Lipton a few years ago, I said, he's talking about the biology of the belief, right? And how powerfully held beliefs change your biology, right? The basis of his groundbreaking work. And I said, all right, so this is after I'd moved out of the house with the cell towers. And I was like, all right, Bruce, or Dr. Lipton, if I'm living next to a cell tower and I have a strong enough belief that it can't hurt me, am I impervious to harm? And he said 100%. If your belief is strong enough. I was like, that's an interesting theory. I'm still not moving near one of those damn things, but he made a good point, around that in relation to what you just said.
How much laser-like focus can you hold in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, look at, these breatharians that I think have existed and probably exist, right? I mean, everyone's fighting about keto, paleo, vegan, whatever. And meanwhile, there's people just getting prana from the ethers and sun gazing and shit and doing just fine because they've managed to discipline themselves in a way to be able to access and harness that energy.
Yeah. If you can maintain the charge between physicality and spirituality, I mean, we're all made up of this dipole. So, we have a physical body, but we also have a spirit, and kind of like we have this quantifiable, measurable, tangible electromagnetic transverse universe that we can measure and, stamp and crystallize and put under a microscope. Then we have like dreams, and we have like astral projection. We have all these phenomenon that we can do. And, obviously we're not living up to our full potential. Like it sounds to the layperson like if I'm by a cell tower and my belief is strong enough, the whole thing that you just said, it sounds pretty far out that you're like your mind can override this, like these powerful signals. But if you understand what is everything, like what are we like living in? What is this plasma cocoon that we're living in? This ether, this whatever. It's less and less far out, especially when you see people like having legitimate powers of like pyrokinesis. You think, oh, lighting stuff on fire with your hand, that's stupid. That's completely ridiculous. However, if you think about how many millivolts each of your trillion cells are, and you extrapolate that out, you're like 300,000 volts in your body. So spontaneous combustion and pyrokinesis, focused energy, focused chi, concentrated, this starts to make a little bit of sense, right? So
my friend Alex Zach legit bent a spoon with his mind. He was trained to do it, and he did it. He was only able to do it once. I don't know if he kept trying, but he did the one, and he has the spoon on his desk. And I know he's not lying. So there's a lot more to our existence here than meets the eye. Before we move on from Blushield, for people that want to check that out, go to lukestorey.com/Blushield, BLU, no E. lukestorey.com/Blushield and use the code Luke to save 10% off. But before we officially move on from that, because I want to cover so much with you today, we have a finite amount of time. Tell me a little bit more about the study that you guys are doing and what differentiates it from some of the other studies that people do, around HRV or live blood cell analysis. What makes this one more scientifically rigorous than the other related studies about EMF mitigation?
Yeah, it's a lot more rigorous. This is a pilot study. We're considering it a pilot study because it's our first clinical trial research. It's 12 weeks with 30 participants. And it's independent review board certified. So there's a review board independently certifying that all of our processes and scientific method and everything, how we're collecting data, the ethics, all of it is basically by the book. And what this means is because it's independent review board certified, it's the first EMF category product that not only can be published in a medical journal that's PubMed indexed, but it's the only one that I'm aware of that's gone to this length of scrutiny and testing like blood, heart rate variability, neurocognitive function, blood sugar levels, all this kind of stuff. We're also waiting, the data we're waiting on is for the voltage-gated calcium channel gene expression. Most people are testing against, water, or they're testing heart rate variability, but within a short duration. And we just put out a blog, an article where heart rate variability is very tricky and you want to kind of do it more over a long stretch of time. And we saw statistically significant data there. We saw the data was statistically significant with working memory, REM sleep, deep sleep. We had an 8% drop in glucose, which I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Magna Havis's work, but she made the correlation with like blood sugar and EMF exposure as far as like, you got the voltage-gated calcium channel side, and then you got the blood sugar side. And, these are kind of proposed causal mechanism. I mean, anything that affects our voltage is going to affect everything. It's really hard to isolate. Like EMF does this to the body. That's really hard to isolate. But we did see in a very healthy population, meaning these people, I don't know if they're keto or what, but their levels were really good. Like anybody would be happy with their blood sugar, glucose levels prior to the pre-data on the blood. We still saw an 8% decrease. So in the next study we're going to do is going to be a more dynamic cohort and hopefully more people, and hopefully we can fund that all. We're self-funded on all of it, which is great. So it's really expensive to do these clinical trials, but we're seeing all these metrics across the board improve. And it's just kind of really exciting. And I'm really excited to drop that study this fall.
That's rad. I can't wait. I don't know that, I think this episode will come out before that, but obviously people can go look at the study on your site when it comes out. Oh, that was another thing that was really intriguing to me about the Blushield technology in the beginning. And we talked to Mark about that. And as I said, episode 198 was the animal studies. And I want to belabor the topic, but it was really compelling to me that in New Zealand, his original studies were on, I think, a chicken farm and a cow farm or something, right? And you can't placebo animals. So that was really interesting, and people can go back and listen to that to get more information. But the funny thing about people like you guys that are self-funding studies to me is that you still have to pay for the study even if you don't get the results you want.
Yeah, dude.
You know what I'm saying? They're expensive.
Yeah.
So when everyone's like, I meet companies like you and we're doing a study, I go, oh man, I hope for their sake that, they get what they wanted to hear, because you can't be like, hey, we want a refund because our shit didn't work.
Right.
So,
and that's the purpose of doing a pilot study. It could have been more like, we're basically want to go to further testing, but we kind of had to like splatter paint and just figure out like what is sticking and like because we don't actually, like most people, it's debatable. Like what's actually causal about EMF? We know for certain from the study that people sleep way better and they get more neurotransmitter function, and they have better blood sugar levels for sure. And their heart rate variability is increasing on a trend that's positive for sure over 12 weeks of time. Gradually, incrementally gets better and better. So that's what we know right now at this moment. And again, we're still waiting on some of the True Diagnostics, that was our sponsor into the independent review board certification. So once we get that data, and they just got the patent on their new algorithm. So they're going to put all of our data through their whole new system, which is really cool. That hasn't really, so their Horvath aging clock, all of this kind of stuff is brand spanking new, which they had some issues with some of their older algorithms, in my opinion, and self-admittedly by them. But it's really going to be exciting to see like what comes out with this new algorithm.
That's rad. I can't wait to see it. Swear the last question on this topic. Is there any difference in the mechanism of action of Blushield devices depending on whether or not you're in an old school country with 3G or if you're living in New York City with 5G?
No.
It's a blanket solution regardless of like what frequencies are in your
atmosphere. Because it's working on the biology. You can walk through any energy field.
Okay.
We're producing energy fields all the time. Somebody has a fight with somebody, or their spouse is arguing or something like that in a room, and then people walk in after that. They can like literally feel the energy in the room is like off or different. And if that pattern happens over a number of years, like somebody could be like moved out of the house for a long period of time, and it's like in the wood and actually in the physical structure. So we're always interacting with energy fields, good, bad, negative, indifferent, whatever. So it really doesn't matter, because the Blushield's causing the entrainment at the cell level, and it's allowing the body to have more surplus charge, because it's all about charge distribution, right? Like unhealthy cells in the body forgot how to communicate with all the other cells. So, if we can really use PEMF, if we can use like Blushield technology and herbs to kind of get that cellular communication back, then everything can be optimized, and the natural adaptation within the structures of the body can, be optimized essentially.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. I think I've exhausted that topic to my satisfaction. Hopefully the audience is as well. And I try to think of every question that someone listening would have and not miss them, which is why these things end up being a couple hours long. All right, let's move on to Shen Blossom. And I'm so glad that we are finally able to have a conversation about this, because I've been using your products kind of quietly, low key for, I don't know, many years now. I think probably since the time we met or something. And there are a couple in here that are part of my daily routine. And as I'm using stuff, I'm always curious about them. The first one being what you call the blood purifier. And
Aka Hinoki.
I figured out this, what's it called?
Aka Hinoki, yeah.
Aka Hinoki. And is all your stuff of Japanese origin?
95% of it. There's some things that I source, like the Biocean minerals that I don't make. These people have done it very well with the Rene Quintone lineage, and some things that I feel are really good additions or supplements to our line. But yeah, our supply chain is completely 100% unique, and it was a relationship that I've developed with families. We have a network of families in Japan, essentially, and their skill set as far as not only like harvesting and knowing where to harvest some of these wild botanicals, but their skill set in processing them in certain regards. We process about 80% in-house at our lab in Kansas City. So we get raw material picked and harvested at the proper time, which is super important. And we trust these people because we know they've been doing it for a long period of time. But certain teas, for example, that's a skill set. You can't really control nature and humidity and, all these levels when you're doing fermentations or when you're making miso or shoyu or any of this kind of stuff. So these guys are masters at their craft, and there's only and some of these things, there's only one place to get it in the world of that grade and that quality. So we're very blessed and fortunate to be able to house these and bring these surplus products to people. And it's been a passion project of mine for a long time because, working in the health and wellness industry for 20 years, doing everything from supply chain, product development, you see kind of the patterns in the big labs, and most people are just really creative with their branding, but they're getting a lot of their raw materials from the same source, produced in the same way, 5-to-1 extracts, this and that. So I was just like, dude, if I'm going to do something, I want it to be innovative and creative and unique. And just life put me on that path, and I met the people I met, and we were able to develop a really tight-knit family network in Japan that's been doing this in 20 generations. I mean, that's a lot of skill and knowledge refined and passed down with food products and herbal products and things of that nature. So this is the first time we've actually really talked on any platform really about it, because I've always really wanted these things to speak for themselves. Because if you have been around herbs, if you've tasted herbs or culinary foods or any of this kind of stuff, and then you taste this and you have a sophisticated enough palate, even if you don't really have a sophisticated palate, people notice a difference in these because they're traditional sake extracts versus a lot of these dual extracts that are on the market, and they just have a different quality, flavor profile, effect, efficacy. It's just really special stuff. And the herbs are where my heart is, because they're the most powerful medicines I think we can really utilize in our body. I mean, tech is fun, and we like our toys, right? We like to play with this kind of stuff and I like developing these kind of electromagnetic and plasma things. But at the end of the day, nature is supreme. It has a supreme intelligence, and it's all built into what comes out of nature. And if we can utilize old school traditional techniques to break it down in a way that doesn't disturb its nature, its character, its personality, so to speak, and we can concentrate it, but make it protected and preserved. For instance, some of our ginsengs and some of our extracts, they're literally 22%, 24% alcohol concentration, where a lot of tinctures you see online are 40%, 50% high ethanol concentrations. And that can disturb the chemistry of some plants. For instance, ginseng, if you put it too high enough of an ethanol concentration and you're prioritizing time, meaning you can get it done more quickly and break down the starch and squeeze every last drop out of these older ginseng roots, you don't really you miss the point that you're changing the chemistry with this alcohol, and you can flip some androgenic compounds in ginseng, for example, into estrogens. So there's a low and slow way that we take with Shen Blossom. That's why, some of the stuff goes out of stock. We might not have certain things for a season, and it's very boutique, very, very old school preparations. And again, I like to let them speak for themselves and have people just taste them. And that's when they get the best education versus me talking about it.
Well, that's been my experience, but I still appreciate you talking about it. And I'm honored that I'm maybe the first podcast you've been able to have the opportunity to go in depth on this. But what struck me about the Shen Blossom at first, I think, was I had no idea there was a lineage of herbalism in Japan, because Chinese herbs from China, obviously, Ayurvedic herbal system from India. I mean, those are kind of the ones that you hear about, maybe a little bit in Korea. So when I found you and your stuff, I was like, wait, Japan? I didn't even know they did this. I mean, I knew, miso and pu'er tea and some other things like that, but you're on a whole other level here. And by the way, this toasted sesame oil, like, dude, I could straight up drink this. This was so good. I had a little taste of that earlier. But back to the Aka Hinoki.
Yeah, like the tree.
Blood purifier.
Yeah.
So I think I maybe ordered this on your site or something, because when you have to be careful how you say things these days because of the
coof.
The overlords of censorship. But I found out about this phenomenon of shedding, right? And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's not good. I mean, no one in my immediate vicinity has elected to experiment on themselves in that manner. But nonetheless, it's a potential real issue. So I started seeing people talk about pine needle tea, and there's this, it's called, what's that word?
Shikimic acid.
Shikimic acid will break down the spike proteins and all this stuff. And then I figured out that this seemed to be some kind of pine oil, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a resin.
So, a resin. Okay,
yeah.
So I started taking this, and I take this on every trip now, because who knows, you're sitting on an airplane breathing the air of all these people that have mutated themselves.
What's nice about it is it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So what we usually recommend is if somebody wants the full spectrum effect, put a couple drops in some hot water and inhale and then drink it. What I often do is I'll take and maybe I can go over this a little bit. So you want to start with one drop of this stuff. It's super potent, as you know from taking it.
It's like turpentine. I mean, it's hardcore.
Yeah. So you basically work your way up to you don't really ever do more than 6 drops in a day. So when you take this under your tongue, you do some deep inhalation. And what's nice about adding a little bit of frankincense, which you probably know about the legendary effects of frankincense. I mean, everybody knows it's what it does for misaligned cells and all kinds of things. It happens across the blood-brain barrier. So the pituitary pineal gland, the inner glands of the brain, it happens to permeate the tissues of the body very, very well. I've looked into shikimic acid and the validity of the claims. I can't say one way or the other. Obviously, it's my product line. There's only so much you can say about things with herbs, but you notice how powerful and intense that is. And another aspect I like about it, and we can look at nature as far as being our teacher and example that, trees, how they heal themselves are through resins. If they get a cut or abrasion, or if they have a mold or fungus trying to attack them, that's kind of the first line of defense for it. So in the human biology, it kind of works in the same way as it's kind of broad spectrum blood purification, but it's also increasing nitric oxide production as well, which we know from sweating in saunas and this kind of stuff. Nitric oxide production is very, very beneficial in a lot of ways.
That's cool. Wow. So this essentially the blood purifier, I mean, aside from my kind of conspiracy theorist application of it, actually I'm a conspiracy analyst to be accurate about it. But you could use this as a tonic herb essentially. I mean,
no.
Okay.
So when you talk about tonics, the distinction is something that's a medicinal herb, like a formula that you would get from an acupuncturist that's for you for a specific condition. You would cycle on that for X amount of days, and then you'd be off of it once you don't need it. So this is not tonic in the sense that you do need to air out the glands and air out the body. So you want to take cyclical breaks. Usually that looks like 5 days on, 2 days off. So a couple days a week, you don't want to be doing it. But if you're doing a long cleansing protocol, you're doing most parasite egg laying cycles are about 100 days. So if you're doing the overkill 120 days cycle with the mountain detox and stuff like that, you would cycle on and off of that at least 2 days a week.
Is there an anti-parasitic effect of this?
Oh, certainly.
Like turpentine and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that
cool.
Sends in noise and chemicals that they don't like. They don't want to hang out in that environment. So.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that you just start with a drop, because I think I hadn't had it in a while, but I just took a flight. So I, of course, brought it with me, and I was doing, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 drops. But I seemed fine.
But you're used to it. I'm just saying, for a newbie, that would be kind of intense.
Yeah, but I like intense things. I think sometimes a little too much. I want to, if I'm going to do something, I want to feel it. And then I'll kind of scale back if I take it too far, which is not how I advise doing herbalism or anything else, but it's just my way. All right, the next thing is your green MSM. Now, I love MSM, but after discovering it, 20 years ago and doing some research, I found that not all MSM is created equal. And like you mentioned earlier, many of these big companies get all their shit from the same place, and it just has a different label on it. Everyone just white labels everything.
Yeah.
I've never seen this kind of MSM, this sulfur compound, and you can break down what it is. I've never seen one like this that's green and feels not very far removed from the cellulose of a tree or a plant. Like it feels like it's minimally processed. And I don't know, my body just likes it. And I never asked you about it or looked into it. I just thought, oh, MSM, maybe his is good. And I got some.
Yeah.
And now I will never touch any other MSM. So maybe tell me about this. And then, out of your other products here, well, there's a couple other ones I use regularly, like the black sesame butter and stuff like that. But there's probably things that are cool that I don't know about yet. So you can tell us like your favorites. But since I love the MSM because I'm always trying to work on my joints and flexibility and all that kind of stuff, it's one that I've been using pretty much every day for quite a long time now. So what's the story with MSM in general and why this one is awesome?
Yeah, so that is actually one of my favorite products if we're talking about favorite products. And it's one we're kind of well known for at this point because it is green, but that doesn't come from the crystalline process. MSM is obviously organic sulfur methylsulfonylmethane. So most of it's produced, like you're saying, like by a couple big labs. Like Bergstrom's probably the biggest. They have a clean 5 times distilled. I think their trademark is Opti MSM, if I remember that correctly. It's been years. It's like 5 or 6 times distilled. A lot of what they're getting their raw material from is the paper milling industry and the petrochemical industry, and they're just cleaning that up, refining it, purifying it, distilling it, and doing this process to get MSM crystals. Some companies add silicon dioxide as a flow agent, so on and so forth. But we basically kind of went back to our roots, and this is more in alignment with the old wood pulp tonic that they would make in Japan. So it is distilled. It's a very dangerous process. Like it's very volatile. It's hard to do. We can basically make about 12 pounds in about 6 weeks. So very small batch, but we're using, so we basically use a alkaline wood ash, and we basically take juniper off our property. There's bamboo pith, there's rosemary stems we're using as the base, right? So, but MSM is MSM. Once you process that down in an alkali solution, you're doing the distillation process, the heating and cooling. The crystals are crystals. They look pretty much similar to anything you'd find commercially, but they're from just a good source. So I think to me that has meaning, and I can feel and taste the difference where most people wouldn't really notice the difference right off the bat. But what we decided to do to enhance the structure, function, or the direction or the action of the product was to infuse our green elements formula at a certain stage of the cooling process. So we're basically imprinting the resonant frequencies of the food, there's like 90 different ingredients in the green elements and we added a couple, there's a phytoplankton we added a little rhodiola for the structure, function, direction of it. And what's neat about that is that it crystallizes into the structure. So even though it drops out of solution when you put it in water, because MSM is like water soluble, so you'll see the green kind of come into the water that you're drinking, there's still, I think, the imprint through the heating and cooling process into the crystalline structure of the MSM that has a benefit as the sulfur connects with connective tissue. And you're talking about the benefits. It's all about connective tissue, hair, skin, nails, joints. It creates superoxide dismutase in the body. It's going to be doing a lot of really great stuff. It's massive anti-inflammatory. And if we can even say that these days, it's really kind of a really useful mineral. And 53% of dry weight urine is sulfur. So we go through a lot of it, we lose a lot of it, and then we denature and lose a lot of it in our food when we process it incorrectly, or we're just not getting enough. So it's a good thing to supplement. And usually I try and do full spectrum herbs and foods, generally speaking, but there's some examples. And we kind of made the MSM a full spectrum food just because of the green elements addition to it. And through that process, we made it more than just a single, like you don't want single frequency generators, you want multi-complex waveforms. We wanted this to have kind of a support system for the MSM to really do what it does. And that's why we think it's a lot more effective than just any kind of MSM on the market for the most part.
I love it. It's amazing. I was really happy to find it, especially because I started looking into it, and it's like, it's just a byproduct of the paper industry, and it's, you basically just powdered pulp. It just was very suspect, so it was hard to find a brand that I could trust, but my body likes it.
Yeah. And DMSO is very aggressive. It's like the precursor. MSM is oxidized DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I did an episode recently on DMSO, and I've had it around. I use it topically for a long time, but I not so much of, I haven't so much gravitated toward using it internally.
It'll make you smell good.
Seems a little aggressive, and it makes your whole house reek.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hardcore. All right, so I want to talk about PEMF, and I want to talk about the Theraphi. But really quick before we move on from the Japanese herbs and the whole Shen blossom world, something else I think is interesting about your line is that there are some things like the MSM, for example, that are more of a supplement, but there are many of them that are actually just delicious foods or food kind of, I don't know if food additives is the right word because that sounds artificial, but just things like your, what's this one right here?
The nori sprinkle?
Yeah, like the nori sprinkle. I don't even know what it is. It just makes my food taste good. And that's as far as I got with it. But a lot of your stuff like the toasted sesame oil are things that you can actually integrate into your diet and eat as food. So maybe give us a quick breakdown just on the medicinal nature of some of the food products.
Yeah. And you know, what's really cool about the Japanese lineage, like when you go back to what you were talking about originally about like Ayurveda and TCM, like most of the herbal systems come from Ayurveda. It's one of the oldest in the world. And then that migrated, and the Chinese kind of formulated their own system over like 5,000 plus years. And then that kind of migrated over to Japan, where they imbued like kind of the understanding of TCM, 5-element theory, yin and yang, and blended it with their herbal folk medicine, their indigenous folk medicine. So food is huge in Japanese culture as far as like, and obviously I got into nutrition and herbalism and understanding that food is medicine, right? So I wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to eat fast, quick, healthy stuff. And if people aren't really technically skilled, you can make culinary applications a work of art, and you can make it medicinally viable using 5-element theory. So if you balance sweet, salt, pungent flavors, you can balance all of these things in a way. So I was like, why don't we just make some formulas like nori sprinkle or the Mediterranean spice? And I'm working on an Italian blend right now. Why don't we make it something easy that people can just sprinkle on stuff if they're not like culinary savvy, and they'll get the health benefits, the medicinal benefits, but it's also just delicious food. So that's kind of what and obviously I'm a huge fan of shoyu. I couldn't find anything on the market that I liked. And then, having these connections to Japan, I'm like, hey, find me that good stuff, the spring water, and like done right, fermented, and all that kind of stuff. And we just were like, can we get enough of this to sell? Like that's what there's some things like you've tried today that we just don't get enough, and it's just so specialty that we just could never really put it on the website.
It's a bummer, that ginseng. And then the other brain tonic with the Schizandra extract in it. That was super rad too.
That's actually, that one I'm thinking of putting, like, it's just a time thing. We got to make it and do the whole thing. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of like have these butters and produce them in a way, because like you just can't go get a black sesame butter off the shelf or a toasted sesame oil. I mean, I don't know if you've tried toasted sesame oil from the store.
There's nothing like this, dude.
Depth of character in the flavor profile.
Yeah,
is
and also
unreal.
the oxidation. Like, we're talking about seed oils have been rightly demonized, but they're not all seed oils are created equal. I mean, I drink black cumin oil from Activation. I don't drink. I mean, I take little hits of that, and it's in all your stuff is in Myron glass. Maybe you could speak to that in a second too, for those that don't know. But my issue with something like sesame oil is I like the taste of it, but it always tastes rancid and off. It's oxidized because plants make seeds to protect what's inside of them, and then we bust them open. They're not supposed to be busted open unless you do it in a way that doesn't make them go bad. So a lot of the bad rap that seed oil gets is not solely because of the type of fat that they contain, but it's because of how they're processed, which turns them into an inflammatory shitstorm.
Right. And then people get hung up on the fat ratios of the carbon chains, like EPA, DHA, all this kind of stuff, but they don't realize like some of them have lignans, some of them don't. So some of the lignans are anti-inflammatory, while they might have more oxidative, inflammatory omega-6, for example. Like they're counterbalanced with a lot of lignans and anti-inflammatory like fibers and stuff. So yeah, it gets a little tricky understanding, and people get like hyper fixated on one component. But that's kind of the mindset we've been trained in, like standardize your extracts. We're looking for the Schizandra fraction or the ginsenoside fraction. And we're going to we'll just strip everything out, concentrate as much as we can on that one fraction. Meanwhile, all the cofactors, enzymes, and elements that are helping it be biocompatible and usable by the body are just completely stripped out. So you might be getting a high level of medicinal fractionized, isolated nutrient, but that doesn't mean it's going to work that well in the body. Nature puts it together how it intends, and we try and everything that we do that's concentrated, which they are very concentrated herbal extracts, they're coming in a way that's delivered as nature would intend it, except protected, like that seed oil, in a way that's non-rancid.
Can you explain why you use the Myron glass instead of just plastic jars or clear glass or the amber glass that you typically see products come in?
Yeah, I wanted to go even more old school with that, with the Egyptian stuff, because Egyptians would use volcanic vessels made out of volcanic minerals. And this is kind of the closest technology. The Marron glass only allows infrared waves of light through the material. So if you look at like tomatoes or like oregano, for example, that's a good example. People have oregano that sits on your shelf for a while, and then it just becomes like, it loses its vibrancy and color. It kind of turns this like yellow color. It's less aromatic. The flavor profile is not as good, but you put it in Marron glass and it literally energizes it, and it kind of almost brings it back to life in a sense. So I like using Marron because it's the best vehicle of protection. Like for example, I don't like these, that's plastic, right? Like I don't really like that, but for preserving nutrients, it's the best that there is. It keeps oxygen out, keeps lights out. Some of these like prepared wakame or nori sprinkle or things like that. Sometimes I have to opt for these kind of like Mylar bags, because what's going to serve the product the best? I have to think of that first. When I can, I put everything into Marron because that serves the product the best, especially with liquid extracts.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing that. And I know because I have friends that have skincare lines and stuff, and they use that glass. It's way more expensive. It's like
more than double.
Yeah. It's hard. I always feel bad throwing these glass containers away. I have a pretty decent collection of them, and I'll just like scrub the label off and use it for, I don't know, store my microdoses or things that don't come in a proper container.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always bummed. I'm like, I don't want to throw this away because I know it's expensive and it's useful. It's so interesting that it filters out the UVA and UVB, which is what causes things to oxidize and degrade. It's just so interesting that somebody came up with that in a glass. Yeah, it's basically like a glass rainbow or something. It's just so cool.
Yeah, they were kind of playing on that old ancient Egyptian vessel, like tourmaline vessels that they used to use.
Oh, is that how they came up with it?
Yeah.
Oh, cool, yep. Cool. All right, let's talk about PEMF. So this is a topic I've covered a few times on the show, and we'll do our best to link to those. And also, by the way, we'll link to the Shen Blossom with the discount code in the show notes at lukestorey.com/Shen. And we'll also put the information about the ARC PEMF and the, what's the plasma thing called again?
Theraphi.
Theraphi, yeah. We'll put links to everything we're talking about at that. Just know that if you guys want to check this stuff out, there's discount codes and all that good stuff. So I talked about PEMF on the show. I'm a huge fan. I have various devices around the house in the PEMF range. But when I heard you talk about yours on Matt Blackburn's show, Mito Life, shout out to that. It's one of my favorite podcasts. I was like, what the hell? This dude is doing some next level shit that is way different than I think, and maybe I could be wrong, but I've never heard of anyone doing it in kind of an analog, more earth compatible way to deliver these frequencies to the body. And then before we started recording, you guys put me on the session, and it was freaking epic. I mean, way cooler than any PEMF thing I've ever used. And I'm not just saying that because you're here.
Yeah,
even if you weren't here, I would tell you.
Say that to all the guests, right?
No, I don't. I don't. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, it was pretty cool. Thanks for bringing that. But no, you're on to something really, really interesting here. So, I don't want to take up too much time kind of re-explaining what PEMF is. Maybe if you could just briefly kind of describe what PEMF is and how it's used therapeutically, and then take us into what you've done differently, because I think that's really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. Pulse electromagnetic therapy, field therapy has been around for a long time. What you're doing is you're inducing a magnetic charge onto the cells, essentially. And from what I understand, the primary mode of action is that it works on the polar lipids. So you have these lipids around the cells that are hydrophilic and lipophilic. And what happens when you, let me back up. There's two main different types of PEMF. There's oscillators, and then there's like what they call impulse devices. So the oscillators basically are a computerized system that resonates waveforms. So they have a waveform like a triple sawtooth, square wave, sine wave, whatever the brand decides to use as a carrier. And then depending on how sophisticated they are in their signal generator, they add these frequency waveforms. They either are constant or they change throughout the day depending on, again, the brain of the unit. But the principal understanding is that they're creating a waveform that creates sympathetic resonance entrainment, like with the Blushield. So what it does is it starts to vibrate the cells in a way to where it creates the entrainment, and then those different brainwave states that you can get into, or oscillations depending on the tissue type, will start resonating and getting this like micro massage. And now the impulse machines are far more intense. So you're creating just a magnetic discharge. If you look under an oscilloscope, it's called a slew rate. It's just up, down. It's like a peak snap, which you heard on our machine. That's raw magnetic energy. And a lot of companies make machines that are high intensity. They have different ways to kind of get around the spark gap chamber issue, which they'll build it in a vacuum, or they'll do just different techniques to try and keep the spark chamber from needing frequent calibrations or oxidizing parts or what have you. So we have these two different systems. I'm a huge fan personally of everything I've tested out and played with. I like the stronger magnetic fields. Now, a lot of people out there, they talk about like the weaker magnetic fields and the benefits, and that's all cool. I'm not here to like argue that point. I want more horsepower out of something. I'm like you, I want that intensity where it's, you can feel something really going on.
Well, you didn't even have this thing turned up all the way, and it was like rattling my whole body. You're like, want me to turn it up? And I like intense stuff. And I was like, I'm good right there.
Yeah.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's very, very powerful. And this whole process came from understanding magnetism. And then I really wanted to build something because I wasn't finding anything that I liked. The highest end product, the lowest end product, I don't remember even how many units I've bought and played with over the years, and then how many ones I tested out that were high intensity, but nothing really kind of satisfied. Like, how do we replicate nature? I want to make lightning in a box. I want like old Tesla tech that's really charges the cells. You see those old pictures of him, and he has this big mushroom-like electrodes just firing off lightning into the room. He's just sitting there reading a book. He's charging his cells up. Like, how do we kind of get something that works at that level? So I ended up finding a couple engineers that they were in the medical industry. They worked on MRI machines and things of that nature, and collaborated with my friend and colleague who's an acupuncturist. And we were just like, how do we make the most natural signal? And we found that a lot of even high intensity machines were solid state. So they're semiconductor technology, and they were mitigating voltage. They make it so you can like completely control the signal. And I understand like what's going on with the fractality of nature, and that nothing's ever repetitious like in nature. And these machines, I think they were moving towards more of a clinical mindset where a practitioner can put it on a level 5 intensity at this, amplitude and this frequency, and they can get that consistency. Where I think practitioners by and large are coming around to understanding that, the body doesn't really work like that. It needs variety. So the slew rate, creating all these harmonics and all these like pulses, allows all of your body to resonate out in its own frequency. So you don't have to do any guesswork with frequencies, because and you get instantaneous effect. And that's another thing too, because with a resonator, you might understand like if you have a low power resonator and you're laying on a mat for like an hour or something like that, and it's resonating, you might see all these cells slowly in certain areas come into sympathetic resonance, but it might not really affect the entire body in a proper way because they're just doing guesswork with their frequency algorithm. And then it's not like really a true impulse wave. It's like whatever waveform that they're choosing. So a couple of the distinctions, I wanted to make a machine that was ultra low maintenance. Like, I didn't want to have to mess with this thing and calibration, because everybody that was doing like a decent job in PEMF that was doing an impulse machine, it was always like, every 1 year or 2 years, you have to send in, or X amount of hours, you have to send this thing in for calibration. So I was like, how can we machine the parts to be more durable and robust? And then I wanted it to kind of have a natural it's like the Blushield of PEMF. It's changing the amplitude and frequency all of the time, as you felt. You'll get like little bursts, and what's nice about that is it acts kind of like the old chaos therapy from Chi Institute. It's like a pattern interrupt in any kind of subconscious or conscious like thought forms it kind of snaps you out of that a little bit. So there's the anxiety, mental, emotional aspect. There's also the physicality where you're getting depth of field penetration. So you're getting into the bone marrow, you're getting the stem cell production, you're getting the oxygenation of the tissue. You're getting proper circulation. And to a lot of people, it feels like voltage, but it is a pure magnetic field. And this machine I'm really excited about because, I was finally able to build something that I was like happy with myself for personal use. And as you've experienced, it's just it's hard to explain the difference. Like it's really a unique experience in and of itself,
Yeah, I would say the sensation is, what's immediately evident is that it's much more random in terms of the intensity and also just the feel of it. It's like other PEMF devices like clack, 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 clack. They just kind of hammer on you, right? Which is great. Like if you have an injured knee or something, right? You put on those, I call them the donuts. I don't know what they're called. You put on your knee and just let it rip, and then you walk away and you're like, holy shit, my knee's better. But as far as like a full body application, or like how we had one of your rings around my neck, like I don't know that I would be able to hang with that with the solid state, more traditional existing PEMF technologies.
Yeah, and you're essentially changing the inherent voltage. So you're putting like circuitry between the point source magnetic field, which in ours is plasma, and it's going through a circuit, and it's inherently changing the inherent voltage. If you're like using semiconductor technology to go step up and step down the ampere or the intensity levels of it, you don't want to change that. You want that point source magnetic field from start to finish. You want that to affect your biology in a beneficial way and not really have any intermediary. I think I gave you that analogy earlier. It's like when you're playing a guitar, you have an acoustic guitar, it has a resonance. You plug a jack into it, and then run it through a pedal. You push that pedal down and it has like a reverb or a distortion or it's some kind of an echo effect or something like that. It's changing the inherent natural sound before it goes to the amplifier and is amplified. So we did everything we could to give you the most control possible in an analog machine, meaning you can change the pulse rate, how fast it's pulsing, which somebody might confuse with frequency. It's not really the same thing. It's pulse rate. It's how fast, which is a frequency in itself, but it's not frequency generating like an oscillator. And then you can control the intensity or the amplitude independently. So that took engineering a modular chamber for the plasma to arc off and create that lightning and create that effect.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
You're the Keith Richards of PEMF innovators, going direct.
Yeah, exactly.
He's famous, except on Satisfaction and some other songs, but like the Keith Richards sound that you hear is a Telecaster plugged into a Fender amp. Yep. Boom, and just pushing the levels a little bit to crunch it up. But
and we all know, like those of us who are like more on the audiophile level, like, those old tube amps sound completely different than solid state amplifiers. It's
100%.
It's totally different.
There's no comparison.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't tried like any of the newfangled amps, but professional musician friends of mine that could afford whatever amps they want, they just get like, people aren't using so much like Fenders and Ampegs and whatever. They're using like new fancy $40,000 amps, but they're still tube, right? Yeah. They're just like a better they're basically copying 1957 Fender Twin, whatever, yep, and just like making it a little warmer and juicier. But no one's like going, oh, we're switching to all solid state. At least in the genres of music that I follow, there's certain things that you just can't innovate past because it was already done so well. But in your case, it wasn't done. So you just saw a need for yourself and created something super cool.
Yeah. And we, everything is custom machined, like the capacitors, the transformer, all the internal components, like, to get it to fire off the way we wanted it to fire off and have that randomization effect, all of that is machine and having the durability and not having to maintenance it. Like, you can go 10, 15 years without a single family, like 3 or 4 people using it pretty regularly, no problem. A practitioner, maybe 8 to 10 years, you'd have to get it calibrated if it's not performing well. We've ran these things for, hours and hours and hours and saw the wear. We're just like, wow, this is awesome, because it really, nobody wants to buy a heavy analog machine and have to ship it every couple of years to get it calibrated. Brutal. Like, I didn't.
Brutal. My ozone generator for the pool broke, and I could have sent it in for repair and I just threw it away. I was like, I'll just get a new one. It would have cost me, not as much, but a good chunk of change to send it in and wait and find a box, and it might break on the way. Like, no one wants to ship delicate and heavy equipment around. Yeah. Well, man, that's super cool. I'm excited because I'm a huge fan of PEMF, and like I said, I haven't used one that has been this cool. So I'm excited to see where you go with this. All right, last thing I want to cover is the Theraphi. And this is something I've had my eye on for a while, and they're, admittedly, like some of the stuff that's really cool is also exceedingly expensive.
Yeah.
So I, haven't pulled the trigger and got one, but I just, based on intuition and just gut feeling, it's one of those things that's on my vision board of like, I got to have one of these in my house. And I tried it once at Harhari's Transformational Healing Universe out in LA. And he's the guy that like is my go-to. Actually, he usually comes to me and is like, I found the thing, man. I got the thing. And he's usually right. Like when he finds shit, if he takes the time to tell me about it, it's cool. And he got one. And I used it out there just once, and I was blown away. I think we did like maybe they're 15-minute sessions usually.
I run it for 15.
Okay.
Paul would tell you probably like start with like increments of 3, 6, and 9.
Well, the first time I did it, I think we went for like 45 minutes or something. Maybe that's why I liked it so much. And it just like
it didn't get hot. It didn't.
No.
That's cool.
No, it just put me and it was like right after a conference. So I was like really kind of agitated and hyped and worn out. And I won't say stressed because I was having fun, but I was like in a very, activated state. And that shit just laid me out. And I went into like a really beautiful theta dream time. And it left a huge impression on me, enough to the point where I was like, I got to find the creators of this and interview them. And I just haven't gotten around to it. Lo and behold, you and your wife walk in and you have one of these damn things with you. And I got to do another one.
It's weird how things work, because I was actually working on a plasma machine that's more in tune with the human circuit, just for the last probably 2 months, 3 months. And just random synchronicity, like Wyatt, who's Paul's assistant, like reached out. He's like, hey, we want to get on a call and like just talk. And long story short, like those guys are super cool. Paul's actually an herbalist. He's like not only this brilliant electrical engineer guy, he's like literally hand widening these like 500,000 volt Tesla coils and like making this stuff, actually doing the making and building the circuit board and everything. But he's also an herbalist, and he's got one of the biggest. He's built, I think, I don't want to misquote it, but I think it's something like 15 or 20,000 square foot facility up in Canada, where it's going to be the biggest medicinal mushroom growing facility like in Canada. So he's doing a lot of cool stuff. Like I was telling you with the lineage here, like I like to follow things with the lineage, whether it's electromagnetism and looking at like Tesla work, heavy side, all those guys, the lineage of understanding with these herbs, right? Like with the Japanese network that we have. Paul is one of these guys that, he was taking apart his family's TV when he's like 6 years old, trying to figure out how the electronics work. So I think people, when they start really young, like the people that we work with, like that train since they're 4 or 5 years old in herbalism and acupuncture and all this kind of stuff, people that are geared towards something, to me, like that's pretty significant when you know that early, like what you're going to be doing, what you're wanting to do it. And then as an adult, you're doing it at a high level mastery level. So he's created a lot of stuff, but the Theraphi is really a culmination of all of the things. Like he's built PEMF devices. He built a lot of these type of devices for years and years and years. And he just thought, maybe the world wasn't like ready for a Theraphi type device. So he put all of his knowledge with plasma technology, PEMF, Rife stuff, all of the stuff, and the kitchen sink into a system. And then he basically integrated Dan Winter, who came up with the frequency algorithm that's in Theraphi, the phase conjugation collapse wave field. And it's an unbelievable machine. And I've had mine since like 2019. He gets a hold of us and he's like, yeah, we love what you're doing with Blushield and all this kind of stuff. And we decided to partner up, and we're going to be importing his devices to the United States and do some assembly and then distribute here from the United States and get these out there in a bigger way, because they're pretty well known worldwide. But I don't think people know the depth of what this thing can do for anti-aging, especially, but also consciousness and a whole lot of different levels. And that bridged a gap for me, and why I was looking at plasma in the first place is I was like wanting to blend yin and yang, because from my training with TCM and like what we're understanding with the whole lifestyle thing is that I want the magnetic earth energy, that deep visceral punch, but then the plasma works on these kind of etheric realms and basically acts as a consciousness amplifier, but also it's imploding these decaying waves at a center point into the body where the body acts as a dielectric medium. So it absorbs all this light energy essentially. And when you got proper charge and proper charge distribution in the cells, there's a lot you can do with that, especially if you know Qigong or Tai Chi or any of these kind of like these art forms that like utilize consciousness to heal the body, to do whatever you want, really. It's pretty interesting.
Well, today was a great day to try both the ARC PEMF and the Theraphi because I was just smoked from flying this week. I woke up today and I was like, oh my God, because we had a podcast yesterday, had you today. I mean, thankfully with you, it's chill and I know we're just going to hang out. Sometimes when I'm just meeting someone, it's, a little
more
different because you have to kind of establish rapport and it's a little more work for lack of a better term. And then I have another one tomorrow with my dentist, which is easy. But I woke up today and I was like, oh man, another one. I don't know if I can do this. I was just so tired. Meditated, woke up, still tired, or came out of it still tired. I was like, oh my God. So when you showed up, it was a great way to test the before and after. Because if I already felt great and energized, I might not have noticed. But after doing the PEMF and then doing the Theraphi, like I don't know how long we've been talking. It's been a while. I'm fully energized and feeling like hella lit.
That's awesome.
That's a technical term for feeling good.
Yeah, that's a scientifically sophisticated term.
Yeah, but that's how you know. Like I like to test like supplements and stuff when I get off a plane or if I had a shitty night's sleep, then I'll try it. And I'm like, okay, now I'll be able to tell if it works. If my baseline is already deficient, I can tell if it's going to bring me up to my normal level or even surpass that. So it's pretty cool. So for people listening, I mean, put a link to the Theraphi in the show notes. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's basically like two giant light bulbs, one at your head and one at your foot. And in this case, where I'm laying on a massage table. And then there's kind of a motherboard over on the side that controls it or powers it. And then underneath it, there's another big thing that's like under your torso, under the table. So how are those components, it's difficult to visualize, so please, those listening, find a picture, but how are those three components kind of interacting to create this energizing and healing effect?
Yep. So what's under the massage table, under the body is an air core transformer, which is known as Tesla coil. So that thing's putting out 500,000 volts. And you have these hot wires, these resonant wires that basically are going up to these, you call them light bulbs, they're like tubes. And they have 3 electrodes on each of the tubes, and that's braiding a plasma field and it's vortexing towards each other out of phase and creating a null phase emission, right? So it's basically what I would call, from a more technical perspective, it's a non-oscillating longitudinal electromagnetic pulse perturbation. So that's creating a disturbance that decays basically at the center point, right where your lower dantian is, and it's just imploding centripetally into the body as your body's acting as the dielectric field, the medium that absorbs all this photonic energy. So that's acting as one circuit and your body's literally closing the circuit. The brain unit or the actual amplifier, all that is doing is it's got the code in it, it's got the motherboard, and it's powering the system. And also that's what's embedding into the plasma field. So what you're doing is you're pitch modulating the plasma with Dan Winter's frequency algorithm. So all those things are out of phase. And Dan's really cool. He's got a good understanding. And he just kind of talks at a like super high level as far as like, tech, because he wants to be technically, he wants to have a high level of technical specificity, and I can respect that. I'm trying to simplify it so like people can understand like how important this technology is, but why I've been using it for years and why I think it's kind of, it's just taking PEMF, it's taking all this what we know of photobiomodulation to a whole different level of what light or plasma light can do.
Well, I'm glad you're able to translate it for us common folk, because when I found the Theraphi and looked into his work and went to their website, I was like, I want to interview this guy, but I won't be able to keep up. You could tell he's really onto something, but it's so technical and gets so deep into the physics. It's just like, I wouldn't even know how to formulate questions. It's so like over my head. So I appreciate that you're able to kind of translate it. And with these kind of things too, it's almost like, for me, I don't care to understand it that deeply. I want to get a basic idea. I just want the effect.
The benefits, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, laid down, went into a beautiful little dreamy theta state. I'm sold. That's it.
It just does it. And even with kids with like anxiety disorders, ADHD type, it just calms them down. It's wild. Yeah. It's
wow.
Paul was telling me all kinds of stories about stuff we probably can't say, but just amazing, like anecdotal testimonial stuff. And I can see some more deep dive research on this machine down the track, because it's just got a lot of potential on a lot of different levels of like wellness, healing, and so forth.
100%. Well, that's the thing, we were talking a bit about earlier before we recorded. It's always challenging for me and people that I have on the show, because if something's not an FDA approved medical device and it hasn't gone through a certain level of study and research, clinical trials, et cetera, you can't make medical claims, right? Which is fine. I get that, because that prevents charlatans from taking people's money or creating products or services that harm them and things like that.
Totally.
So I kind of get the regulations, right? But it's also super annoying, because I know things about the Theraphi or the biocharger, the amp coil, and technologies kind of in this realm. And I know people first person or anecdotal third person reports that are valid and trustworthy, that people have quote unquote incurable conditions that are totally healed and alleviated using these things. And then you're muzzled and you can't talk about it. It's so frustrating to me, and I kind of get it. So yeah, I look forward to, your PEMF, like what you're doing with Blushield, right? You're like, okay, we know this works. We have all these customers around the world that know it works, but we want to be able to make the claims. And so you need to show the data. So I'm looking forward to, with your PEMF or the Theraphi, when you can say, okay, cool. Yeah, go on PubMed. There's the study. A kid had autism and used this thing for 6 months and now is clinically not showing signs of being on the spectrum, and so on. Just to pull one thing out of thin air, as one condition. But
yeah,
I know the body has the blueprint to heal anything and everything. And that's what annoys me, when people invent things that assist the body in doing so and you can't talk about it.
And the body does it though.
Yeah, it's just like you said with your herbs. It's like the herbs aren't doing anything. They're signaling your body's own healing capacity, just like in psychedelics. I remember one shaman told me, oh my God, I was so floored by the experience. I said, wow, that medicine did this to me and that to me. He said, no, you are the medicine. The medicine that you just drank last night or whatever is a signal to your consciousness to do the work, right?
Yeah. And unleashes or directs or
Yeah, so I think I like that perspective. There's a sense of autonomy and sovereignty in that. That's like, wow, everything is within. Yet it can be really useful to have tools that help give your body the support it needs to do what it wants to do, which is to be in homeostasis and be completely vital and healed.
So here's one thing I can say, because it's something that happened back in France. So basically, where they came from with this particular machine, with the Theraphi, is based largely on Anton Prairy's work. So Prairie was over in France, early 1900s, same time frame where you're familiar with Royal Rife.
Yeah.
So he was like doing really cool stuff. He was building like 12-cylinder boats and building his own microscopes and all this kind of stuff. And he had some pretty sophisticated microscopes for his day. And what he would do is play with radio frequency, look at a petri dish. You know the story. It's shattering cells and trying to figure out what resonant frequencies would do what to what pathogens or organisms or whatever. So he was shut down, and just they tried everything they could do to shut him up in this country. But over in France, they were looking at Anton Prairie's machine, which he had this huge, massive room, and it was a plasma machine, and he was like healing certain things left and right. And the government actually backed him, so they would actually put money into what he was doing. And all the PDFs are out there. You can go look it up. None of it's hidden. It was really well documented. And Prairie didn't know the energy mechanics, I'll say, of what he was doing. Dan Winter comes along several decades later and looks at what he was doing, and he's like, wow, he was almost on point. Like, he just figured out that he needed to finely tune it to phi ratio integers. And like this frequency cascade that he created was basically almost lining up with Prairie's frequencies that he was putting through this plasma machine that was getting all these benefits, like tumors and cysts and just on and on and on. He basically fine-tuned it and then did a proof of concept device with Paul. So he had Paul build the machine, and Paul like did all the the work and integrated his frequency cascade into it. And that's what we have is, it's like a modern day prairie machine. So for consciousness, it works, but the physicality, they were getting some, if you want to know what Theraphi can do, look at Anton Prairie. We're not saying it does any of that stuff, but look at Anton Prairie.
But Anton Prairie could say it because it happened and it was documented in France.
With a less, I wouldn't say inferior machine, but a less finely tuned machine.
Wow.
Instrument. So
amazing. That's a good workaround. I like that. It's like, well, we can't say, but they had the same thing and it did X, Y, and Z.
Only this is cool. Perfected version of it, basically.
I got to get one of these things, dude. Just when I think just when the house is full of all these different tools, I think, oh, I'm good. I don't need anything. But then something even cooler comes along and I become obsessed with that. So
yeah, that's the issue that we have is like people that like our toys. It's like there's fun stuff that there's so many creative people out there, and I just try and simplify for my own life and my own sake. And, my wife, like with all the stuff, I'm trying to what is going to give me the most bang for the buck? And that's how I approach everything with any machine I'm building, anything I get involved with. And with the herbs, like, how can I make this a multi-tool? Like one formula is balanced according to 5-element theory. It does a lot of different things. And that's what's been hard to categorize on the website. It's like, oh, well, it's focuses on immune system, but it also focuses on brain function and hormones. Like it does a lot of different things with one single formula. And less is more. If you have something that's high integrity and produced very well, you could take 15 drops of that and have an effect. Like I think you took like 8 drops of that brain boost, but like most brands are telling you to take 2 whole droppers full of extract. And it's just kind of a waste. If you can make it correctly and efficiently in the beginning, then you're going to have a lot more efficacy, a lot more utilization, a lot more gunk not in your liver breaking down, trying to your body has to filter all this stuff too. So I'm about like efficiency. So I try and focus on the technologies that are, you felt it. It's very quiet. It's very powerful, but very peaceful. It has its own nature, if you can call a machine having a nature. It's very much something that you can go very deep on, and it's not very jarring. Like there's a lot of energy in plasma. I built a plasma machine that was just like a jackhammer, like a multi-wave oscillator. You just feel kind of like all over the place, but this has such a high degree of coherence and a high degree of, you just go into a very peaceful state with it. And that's what I appreciate about it. I
do too. I love it, man. Well, thank you so much for driving 12 hours you guys? Thank you so much. I really enjoy spending time with you, and you're just really interesting, high integrity, cool guy doing good things in the world. So I'm honored that y'all came to visit me and brought all these amazing toys and tools to play around with too. It's like the best day ever.
Let's go make some miso.
Yeah, let's go make some miso. Love it.